Hey students, your piano teacher Tim back here from Piano Lessons on the Web, and I'm willing to bet that you probably noticed that the left hand, right, has certain things that it does quite often. One of those things is play chord patterns. So a lot of times you have the right hand that plays the melody. Well, today we're talking about the left hand, which mostly plays the chords. Obviously you can do more than that, but we're talking about the most common chord patterns that you're going to find in your music. Let's get started here with the first one. Okay, the first chord pattern we have here is the 1-4-1-5-1 pattern. If you're wondering what the numbers are all about, if you don't know, let me show you here on the piano that whenever we're in a certain key, here we happen to be in the key of C, 0 sharp, 0 flats. You have 8 notes in the key of C, starting from C up to the next C. You really have 7 individual notes, because the last notes are the same, C and C. So anyway, you have notes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to 1. So what a 1-4, like what the numbers mean is what note of the scale that chord is based on. So that's based on the first note of the scale, that's C major. The 4 chord is 4 notes up, that's F major, back to C major for 1, G for 5, and then of course these are in inversions, which you will commonly find in your music. So that's why I put them that way. Here is the pattern on the piano. So there's 1, the C major, that's 4, that's the F major, back to 1, 5, back to 1. Make sure you practice this. I would practice this one the most, honestly, because this one you're going to see literally all the time. It's the most common chord progression in all of music. If you're feeling daring, try practicing these in different keys. The only thing you have to keep in mind that depending on what key you're in, so with C major you don't have to worry about any sharps or flats. That's why I wrote them that way. But if they are in different keys, you have to think about what sharps or flats are going on in that key. And if you happen to have a chord that has one of those notes, in key of G it just happens to be F sharp, you got to make sure you have that sharp in there. So if you're feeling brave, try it in all the keys, but just keep in mind of the key signature. Okay, let's talk about the next chord pattern. Okay, the next chord pattern is essentially the same thing. However, it's very common that your 7th chord or your 5 chord, so 1 chord, 4, 1, and then this one changes a little bit. It's very common for them to use what's called a dominant 7th chord on the 5 chord. And they actually leave out the D, the 5th, a lot of times. So just keep that in mind as well. So this is just an alteration, basically, on the last pattern we have. So I'm not going to explain what the 1s and the 4s all mean. I would practice both of these. I would practice them all, but these two in particular you're going to find a lot in your music. Especially, actually, if you start learning cadences, which are these, basically these are cadences. These are basically chord patterns throughout a sheet of music that kind of gives you a direction moving into the piece. Okay, now here's one by itself. By the way, each chord pattern is separated by these 2 lines here. So this one is just one measure by itself, and that's the 2-5-1 pattern. So in C major, that would be 2 chord would be D minor, then you have that G major, and then right there. And you can actually also add 7ths onto these if you're feeling, adventuresome, if you know a bit about jazz. It's a very common, the 2-5-1 pattern is very, very common in jazz. You can also replace 5 sometimes with diminished 7th, just to kind of let you know that happens sometimes. All right, here's an alteration on that same thing. You have your 2 pattern, and then you're back to your 5-7 again. Back to 1 there. Okay, next I'm going to talk about the passing diminished pattern, moving right along here. This is how this works, right? So this chord right here, let me grab the pen so I can show you, but I'm going to circle it here. This chord right here, this 2nd chord here, is what's called a passing diminished chord. It basically connects 2 chords together and passes in between them. The 2 chords I'm talking about are actually the C major chord and this D minor chord here. And basically what you're doing is it's two chords right next to each other, so C major and D major, right? And then what you're doing is you're adding in a chord in between them. So see how they're, the base of the chord or root of the chord is a whole step away from C to D? Well, what you do is you go up a half step and you make that chord diminished. So it passes, so here's your C major, here's your passing diminished back to 2, and then to 5, to 1. You can find, actually I should have played this with my left hand since that's what these are all for. So that's what a passing diminished chord is, or any kind of passing chord. So you take two chords right next to each other, you find one in between there, make it diminished. And it adds a little bit of an extra crunch to it, but you will find these patterns, especially in music, obviously in music, in like more modern music though. You won't find something like this, maybe more in jazz or ragtime or something like that. And then obviously if you're feeling courageous, once again, practice it in different keys. You got to be careful of what though? You got to be careful that the chords fit the key signature that you're in. I can't stress that enough, because if you forget about that, it will not turn out well. And just just so when you go to practice on your own, you understand why if it doesn't work out. Okay, now why is there, like, see how there's D flat, F flat, and A double flat right here? We're going to talk for a second on why that is. So obviously you're going to have the D flat where it is, right? Because you need a D flat diminished chord. And if you don't know already, every D chord of any type, whether it's D major, D minor, D flat, D augmented, D7, anything, has to have a D of some kind, an F of some kind, and an A of some kind. That just helps you define the D flat chord, or the D chord of any type. This happens to be a D flat chord, so that's why this is a D flat. This is an F flat instead of an E, because remember, it has to have a D of some type, F of some type, and an A of some type. And that's why this is actually A double flat, because the note for diminished chord has to be here. However, it also has to be an A of some kind, and the only way to make that work is an A double flat. Just so you know, because you will come across that music a lot. I get that question all the time. Okay, the last pattern we're going to talk about, there is more that I'm going to talk about here in a second, or show you, but the next one is the deceptive pattern. And it's called a deceptive pattern because it's actually the 1-4-1-5-1 pattern, except the last one, we're replacing the 1 with a 6. The chord I'm talking about is right here. Normally be C major, but it's in A minor, and we call it a deceptive cadence. See how it leads you to kind of believe that it's going to finish out like this? But instead, it deceives you, right? Yeah, see how it like kind of went into a different direction there. So maybe maybe the composer's intention was to end on a minor, or just kind of throw your ear off, because a lot of these chord patterns, like I mentioned, and the cadences are designed to give you they designed in a way to make the harmony feel like you're moving somewhere, right? Because if you just played random chords, it would, let me play them on the piano that you can see, it doesn't sound like anything, right? It doesn't sound like anything's moving anywhere. It doesn't sound like there's a pull anywhere. However, when you do these chord patterns, if I stop on that next to last one, you're like, man, it really feels like it needs to pull you back somewhere. So that's actually what a lot of these are about, and that's why you don't just have random chords everywhere in your piano pieces. So I would go through and practice these. One thing I have to tell you is that you're not always going to see them written out just like standard chords like this, because it's just too plain. What you're probably going to see instead are like, and now you will see this actually, it does happen in music, so don't think that you're never going to see it, but some different ways you're going to see it is you can see them written as arpeggios. So keep in mind you might be having to do a little brain work analyzing your pieces, figuring out exactly what the chord pattern exactly is. All right, let me show you maybe like a real life example. Okay, here's an example that a lot of us are familiar with on how you might see the chords in your piece rather than just standard, chords that you see them as. So here in the left hand, you have your left hand patterns, as an arpeggio kind of spread out. And actually the opening here has a very simple chord progression. Let me show you on the piano actually. So you have A, E, A. We're just looking at the left hand part here. So if we're in A minor, that's the 1 chord. E, E, G sharp, that's an E major chord. That's the 5 chord. Back to the 1, back to the 1. So instead of adding the 4 chord in there, they just kind of go back between 1 and 5. You can see that. You can see the chords in a slightly different order. And then after that, you have a C chord, which is a little bit odd. That's a 3. So you can see different ones. Back to a, wait, what would G be? That would be 7. Back to 1. So as you can see that, the chords aren't always easy to pick out. You might have to actually play the notes separately. And if you have music theory knowledge, this is why it's important to know music theory, because if you have the theory knowledge, you can use that to your advantage, saying like, okay, if I have the notes A, E, and A, what chord do I know that's closest to? Well, that's an A minor. And what does it make sense in the key that we're in? So I'm going to try to remember to put a link to lessons on key signatures and music theory in the description for you, in case you're not used to that theory, because being able to identify those chords by sight will make this whole thing a lot easier. But like I said, the whole point is just to show you that chords don't always appear strictly as chords. You got to use a little bit of analysis. Let's maybe look at a different example. Okay, here we have the second movement of the Pathetique Sonata, and actually the chords now are split between the right hand and the left hand. This is another way you're going to see your chords. So while it is a good idea to practice all these chords with your left hand, because most of the time you will see them there, just keep in mind that you can have them split up between both hands as well, just to kind of give you a little bit more context as to how you might be seeing these chords appear in your music. So as you can see, when I play the left hand by itself, it's just a single note. That's because the left hand actually in this case has kind of like a counter melody going on, which is a melody that kind of goes along with another encounter to another melody. So as you can tell, you couldn't hear any chords from that, but when I play it with the right hand included in this case, you can tell that there's a difference. You can actually hear the progression. So that's an A flat major chord, A flat C, and E flat. That tells you that. And then you're going to a G diminished, which is kind of interesting. So that's a 7 diminished chord. Oops. And then this is back to a 1 chord. So as I mentioned before, sometimes what you'll see is you'll find that these 5 chords that we were talking about before, which happens to be this G major chord right here, what you'll see sometimes is you'll see instead of the 5 chord, which is G, B, and D, you'll find what's called a 7th chord, or a leading tone chord. Sorry, 7th is used interchangeably in music when talking about chords, and it can get kind of confusing. But anyway, you go down, that's the 7th note, and that's the chord that you're building off of. So every once in a while, you're going to find that variation, the 1, 4, 1, 7, 1 progression. So just letting you know that you can interchange those, and that does happen in music a lot. Okay, so we're going to talk quickly about the Minuet in G by, well, it's actually from the Notebook of Anna Magdalena Bach. It's by Petzold, not actually Johann Sebastian Bach, which a lot of people believe it is, and I did for a long time until actually somebody in the comments let me know. So I learned stuff from this channel also. Okay, as you can see in this piece, we actually have a left-hand chord here to start us out. And then you have kind of a counter melody going on after that. But as you can see in music, you will see the chords written as they are every once in a while. Unfortunately for the rest of this piece, or the rest of it is more of like a counter melody thing. Bach uses what's called counterpoint a lot, or people that write in the style of Bach, where there's really two lines of melody going on at once. So it's a little bit harder in that case. You really have to know what you're doing to pick out what chords are happening where. You definitely want to check out some of the other lessons on the channel, particularly on playing with your left hand and playing different chords and chord progressions, things like that. And subscribe, because we got new lessons coming out all the time. You don't want to miss a beat. This has been your piano teacher, Tim, here from Piano Lessons on the Web. Thanks for joining us for this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.